Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome into another edition of the Fantasy Roundup. I'm your host, Spencer the Guru Urquhart, here with my co-host, Gabe Henderson. How you doing, Gabe?
Doing great. How are you, Spencer?
Awesome, man. Yeah, can't complain. We got a lot to talk about today here. A lot of fantasy news. I really love this time of year, man, because it's not only got fantasy baseball drafts coming up, but I know a lot of y'all have y'all's fantasy drafts this weekend for baseball. I had mine this past weekend, actually. I had a couple of leagues I'm in, had those go down. But we also have NFL free agency, and with that comes a lot of fantasy football movement with players changing teams, changes fantasy football values. And I know it's still got like 6 months before the season, but it's always fun to speculate.
Yeah, for sure. This is the time of year where you throw on Ian Rappaport or Adam Schefter's tweet notifications, and that way you can be the first to send the latest breaking news to all your friends and make waiver wire pickups for some sneaky little people like I do in my league. We have keepers. So if there's a big move somewhere and someone goes to a team, and they're on free agency because they were hurt, snatch them up right now before anyone else does, stuff like that. So it's always good to be alert.
100%. And I see you got Eric in here, Eric Hernandez, saying, "Who dat?" And we actually do have some Saints stuff to talk about as far as for fantasy, specifically Jamaal Williams signing with the Saints. So let's get into our latest fantasy headlines. Jamaal Williams, we didn't get to talk about it on our last show. He signed with the Saints, I believe, last Thursday on a 3-year deal. Huge move for the Saints, considering that their backfield very much in question, with Mark Ingram a free agent and Alvin Kamara facing suspension. But Jamaal Williams, 1,000-yard rusher from last year, led the league in touchdowns, so definitely a quality signing there. But we'll have more discussion on that here in a few. And the Cowboys made a big move, acquired Brandon Cooks from the Texans. The Texas team's making moves, and Jerry in the house. What up, Jerry? Saying hey, 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 and yeah, who dat, Eric? Yeah, I know Jerry always brings the who dat energy. And speaking of a rival of the who dats, the Panthers making moves. Not only did they trade up to number 1 pick in the draft, they also acquired some solid veteran skill players there. Signed Miles Sanders, running back from the Eagles, as well as Adam Thielen, veteran receiver from the Vikings. And then some baseball news here. Usually with spring training, a lot of times no news is good news, because when you get news like this, it's not a good sign for anybody. I mean, you want your stars out there, and unfortunately, Jose Altuve got hit in the hand during the World Baseball Classic, suffered a broken thumb, and will be out 8 to 10 weeks. I know you're in the Houston area, Gabe. How frustrating was that to see?
Well, I'll touch on it more later when I get to my rant. But as far as Altuve getting hurt, no one in Houston's really stressing about it. The Astros are stacked. Their rotation, just top to bottom, is unbelievable. So,
Yeah, that's
if
true.
that means we've got to trust some young guys like David Hensley at second base, or even turn to a veteran like Mauricio Dubon, who was really good last year, the Astros will be just fine. They've got enough firepower 1 through 9 to where they'll be just all right.
Oh yeah, Astros have plenty of depth. So yeah, would have been worse for a team that was more of a fringe contender. Astros should be top of the charts regardless. And Owen Thomas commented, "Man, we just lost Davenport." I mean, yes, but I mean, he had like no sacks last year. I'm kind of glad Davenport's no longer with the Saints, because he never seemed to live up to the hype. He always was like, "Oh, Davenport, he's gonna be the stud alongside Cam, and he's gonna really pop off, have double-digit sacks." It just never happened for him. So we'll see if he can turn it around in Minnesota, but I tend to doubt it. I'm glad he's gone. So let's move on here to the Jamaal Williams signing. I know y'all are wanting to hear about that, our thoughts on that, about Jamaal Williams. We talked a lot about him, his NFL Saints impact, as far as what he brings to the Saints. We talked about that a bunch on Bayou Bets, and I was in the mind state that it's a positive thing, that he's a huge addition to this team and should carry over that same energy he had from last year, where he, like I said, 1,000-yard rusher, led the league in touchdowns, and was also efficient with it, averaged over 4 yards a carry. Wasn't just some plodding big back. He is more of a bigger back, but he can make people miss. He can catch a few passes here and there. He's not just a total just dump truck out there, you know. So he's somebody that should still be fantasy relevant, was very fantasy relevant last year as someone who is always finding the end zone. And yeah, Jerry's glad he's gone. Davin hurt. Yeah, that's another thing. He was always hurt. And speaking of guys that don't get hurt much, Jamaal Williams always is on the field. He's very durable. That's another plus factor. So to me, the question here, this is the fantasy roundup. The question I'd like to pose here is, does his fantasy value increase by signing with the Saints?
Jamaal Williams is an interesting case study. You know, he didn't have much value going into last year. Obviously, everyone was looking at DeAndre Swift, and then DeAndre Swift went down, and Jamaal Williams just absolutely feasted. And he's one of those guys who was always getting touches in the red zone, so he's going to have a high value because of the amount of touchdowns he scored last year. I don't know whether his value increases. I think it really just depends on how you view him after last year. But now he's obviously going to be a feature back with Kamara. So it just depends, because you've got a guy who was a backup last year who's we've already seen in multiple stops in his career. But then you've also got the pending off-field stuff with Kamara. So you really just don't know. I would say just the fact that we know he's more than likely going to be a starter for a few games next year, I would say that increases his value. But I think his value is really high anyway. So I don't know how much higher you can get other than breaking into the top tier, which I don't think he does. He's not as good as the Saquon Barkleys per se. So,
Right.
But I think he's just going to be a step below it with the Saints now that he's going to have a chance to be a feature back for X amount of games. We just don't know right now.
Yeah, I can tell you all this. Unless the Saints would invest a pretty high draft pick on a running back like Tajay Spears, for example, if they wait till like day 3 to pick a running back, just somebody that's not very highly touted, not really pro ready, then I think Jamaal Williams' value does increase. I know it was pretty high last year, and people were probably thinking, oh, it's 17 touchdowns, he can't repeat that, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, I think he's going to have plenty of opportunities, because I don't see Alvin Kamara playing more than 8 games. I think he gets at least a half season suspension. I think he gets, I mean, I'm trying to think of some comparisons. Maybe not quite as many as Watson, but I mean, Watson got 11. I know it's 2 different cases, 2 different incidents, but it's like, I just feel like the NFL is going to have to lay the hammer here because of the video. There's video evidence that he clearly was involved in the assault of that dude in Vegas. So it's like, I think he gets a minimum of 8 games. And with that, to me, Jamaal Williams was going to carry a huge workload and be an RB1 at least for those weeks. And with the Saints, with Derek Carr, it should be a more explosive offense, should be more goal line opportunities. I think Jamaal ends up with around 11 to 1,200 yards, 10 to 12 touchdowns, catches like 20 to 30 passes. And if Kamara ends up going for the full season, which might happen if he would have to do jail time on top of his suspension, which we don't know, he might get out of that to where then he'd just have the suspension. But if it ends up a thing where he misses the whole season, shoot, Jamaal Williams might end up cracking that top tier. You never know.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think you made a good point in there. And that's one thing that I definitely wanted to touch on was the fact that, you know, Jamaal Williams isn't going to catch as many passes. He's not as explosive as Kamara in the running or in the passing game. But the thing is the running game is going to be more opened up because you have Derek Carr and those weapons outside now. So the Saints offense isn't just going to be one dimensional in the fact that they're just getting it to Kamara. They're going to be a legitimate threat. And I think Jamaal Williams is going to be a huge part of that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. And I mean, last year with Derek Carr at the Raiders, Josh Jacobs was an elite running back. Well, I mean, Derek Carr he'll hand it off. Like, he's not somebody that's just going to throw like the way like with Jameis Winston. And with Carr, he'll check down some. You know, he's a pretty cerebral quarterback to where he'll get his running back involved. So we'll see how things go. We still got a long ways to go before draft season. We still got to see how the NFL draft ends up, because like I said earlier, the Saints could draft a rookie pretty high, and in that case, it could affect things. And then Owen saying, I think sharing the ball with Taysom and Carl will be intriguing. Yeah, that's another factor. Taysom, we have the Taysom factor, so there's no way Jamaal that is going to lead the league in touchdowns again because of that. If it wasn't for Taysom, though, I might say, shoot, he might do it again. But, so there's no way because Taysom Hill, as far as fantasy goes, he's a pest. For the Saints, he's great because he gives you another weapon. But for fantasy, it's like, man, Taysom again near the goal line. He's stealing my Kamara touchdowns, my Jamaal Williams touchdowns, So it's interesting. And Jerry really likes it. Yeah, I feel like it's one that, to me, is if you're the Saints, it was a no-brainer. It's like, how could you not like it? Because, to me, he checks all the boxes as far as what the Saints needed in a running back.
Honestly, if I were the Saints, I would pay 3 years, $18 million was his full deal?
12, only 12 million.
Okay.
We're getting a good value on the contract.
Great value. I would pay that much just to have a guy like him around in the locker room. He is great for lifting spirits, great team guy. He's so much fun. And on top of that, he's going to eat for the Saints. I love this deal.
Yep, and then a tax. They look at the people talk down on Jameis. Well, I wasn't trying to talk down on him. I'm just saying for fantasy, he was great for like Olave, and then Shaheed. He didn't really get to work with Shaheed, but like if he did, like I'm sure he'd be really good for them. And I mean, he's still on the roster. If Carl would get hurt, he'd get to start, and he's a good backup. But that's the thing. If I'm being honest, I would not want Jameis Winston as my starter because of his decision making. He's got the arm, but his decision making is just the interceptions are just too hurtful for where in this league, in this modern NFL, you've got to be efficient. So Carr is definitely an upgrade, I'd say.
He is, but I'm also not going to hate on Jameis as someone who in a 2-quarterback league had him all year last year, hoping he would come back and play.
I'll say this. I'd rather him over. Yeah, I'd rather him over Andy Dalton. That's for damn sure. I was so sick of having to see Andy Dalton under center last year. I was like, give Jameis a chance. Like, give him a chance. So he can't be any worse than this crap. But anyway, let's move on here to the wide receivers that switch teams here. Brandon Cooks and Adam Thielen. I remember Jerry yesterday on Bayou Vets was hoping the Saints could get Thielen, but the Panthers ended up securing his services, had more cap space, and as a result, were able to give him that multi-year deal. But, I mean, Adam Thielen, he's kind of lost a step, probably more so than Brandon Cooks, because, I mean, Brandon Cooks, I know he's been just kind of treading water with Houston, but he's still getting around 1,000 yards a season, and that's nothing to sneeze at. So, Brandon Cooks going to the Cowboys, getting to work with Dak, who likes to air it out. Thielen going to the Panthers. So I'll answer this one first. I'm thinking as far as fantasy relevancy, Cooks will definitely still be relevant. And that Thielen to the Panthers might fall off the map to some degree, especially if they draft a receiver, which I know they got to draft the quarterback first, but with their next pick, they might draft a rookie receiver to where Thielen might not be much better than he was last year. And last year, he was pretty much irrelevant for fantasy because Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson were getting all the work in Minnesota.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you. As someone who's watched Brandon Cooks the last few years here in Houston, he's still a great receiver. He's going to get his in Dallas. He's, like you said, about 1,000-yard receiver. He tries that line every year. I think last year, first time he didn't get it in a little while, and that's because he missed a few games. He still had something like 750 around that mark. Brandon Cooks is going to feast in Dallas as the number 2, and I think that's a great move for him. I think the Cowboys got great value for him. As far as Adam Thielen, no, like you said, he's going to drop off the map. He was an incredibly frustrating receiver last year in fantasy. He had maybe 1 or 2 big games, and then people would target him on the waiver wire, and he just wasn't worth it. He goes back to those 1, 2, 3-point performances usually. Even as a number 1, Carolina has found a way to make receivers fantasy irrelevant. So I think if you take a guy on the tail end of his career, throw him in Carolina, no.
Yeah, because he's definitely –
I'm gonna pass.
Yeah, because he's not an upgrade over DJ Moore. Let's be real. I mean, they traded DJ Moore, then they signed Adam Thielen to essentially take his place. Adam Thielen like you said, Gabe's on the back end of his career. DJ Moore is in the prime of his career. That's not a good swap there, I'd say. And then outside of him, and he's going to be facing number one coverage most likely, because even if they draft somebody, it won't be until day 2, because they've got to spend their day 1 selection on either C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young. So it's unlikely that whoever they draft is going to step in immediately as a number 1. And then we saw last year Terrace Marshall not anywhere close to being a 1, and they just, outside of that, they just don't have much. They're kind of lacking receiver depth. So I know Thielen was talking big, saying, "Oh, we're going to go to the Super Bowl. I wouldn't have signed here if I didn't think we were Super Bowl contenders." But it's like, you might be NFC South contenders. The Panthers are definitely the Saints' biggest threat with the Falcons and Bucks reeling. But Super Bowl contenders, come on, man. You smoking something.
If the Carolina Panthers are Super Bowl contenders, then I need to open those blinds behind me because pigs are flying.
Right? Yeah, something's fishy here. We're in some sort of alternate reality here, because I feel like, I know Stroud and Young are pretty solid as far as I think they have bright futures, but as rookies, like, I mean, Trevor Lawrence, it was the prodigy, the number 1 consensus number 1. He had a good year last year, but his rookie year, he was awful. I mean, Jacksonville was no better, really. I know a lot of it was coaching. Urban Meyer was a complete train wreck, but it's
I was just about to
who's,
say that.
Who's to say Frank Reich's gonna wave some magic wand? I mean, he was a big flop with the Colts, so that's Panthers, man. It's silly. And the Owen coming, and Thielen hadn't been relevant since Jefferson hit the field. I don't know what's going to happen now with the Panthers. He might be a sneaky pickup. He could be, in the sense that he'll receive a lot of targets. If he gets peppered with targets, he might be a decent, like, PPR flex play. But the issue is he probably won't go that late in drafts, because people are like, "Oh, he's the number 1 receiver." And if they see someone's a number 1 receiver, they tend to draft him fairly high. So I doubt I'll have much Thielen in fantasy. But Cooks is normally someone that I stay away from. But going to Dallas, the CD Lamb will get all the number 1 coverage. So Cooks against those number 2s might be able to feast.
Cooks is like DeAndre Hopkins, and they're not similar in play style at all, but the reason I respect them both as receivers is because they've managed to take the dumpster fire that is the quarterback room in Houston and still consistently churn out 1,000-yard seasons.
Right.
So now that Cooks has a guy who throws for a lot of yards, he's in an offense that's explosive all around, he's going to be fine. Thielen, I'm not touching. I had him in a 16-team league last year as one of my receiving options, not touching him. Never doing that again. If other people want to dip into that pool because he's a wide receiver 1 or he's a name that people like in late rounds, that's fine. I'm not touching it. Great career, not touching him.
Yeah, I mean, when he was before Jefferson, he was a legit number 1 there in Minnesota, especially after they traded. Well, did they still? I think they had Diggs. They traded Diggs and then got Jefferson. So yeah, when it was him and Diggs, like, he was the number 1. And then when Diggs got traded to Buffalo, that's when Diggs really blossomed into a true number 1. So yeah, that was those were the days. But it's 2023 now. Things change quick, and the reality is that Thielen is no longer a number 1. Moving on now to fantasy baseball. Here we got my top 12 overall rankings. We're gonna get y'all prepped here for fantasy baseball drafts, because it's kind of hard to think much past this. You know, I mean, you want to have your rankings, obviously, but as far as just ranking overall, it's kind of tough because people just go with differing strategies. But I'd say for the first round, you know, you can kind of plan that out and kind of get your first round ranked, and so to where you pretty much know who you're going to take. And so to me, if you're playing on ESPN, where Shohei Ohtani gets to be a hitter and a pitcher, to me, he's the undisputed number 1, because you'll be getting, he's only utility only, so you'd have to only can put him in your utility spot. But then he pitches, and he's an elite starting pitcher when he pitches. I mean, he's probably not the number 1. I put him as the number 1 though, because he's going to be drafted before any other starting pitcher, because when he's not pitching, he's going to be hitting dingers and stealing bases. So he's, to me, the undisputed 1 if you're playing on ESPN, which I do. Yahoo, though, it's different. He's separate. He's a hitter and a pitcher. There's 2 different copies of him. It's kind of complicated there. But Ronald Acuna, Trey Turner, Jose Ramirez, Aaron Judge, Julio Rodriguez, round out the top 6 all elite options. Then Vlad Jr., Juan Soto, Mookie Betts, Kyle Tucker, Manny Machado, and Yordan Alvarez rounding out my top 12. I feel like Yordan getting kind of slept on, Gabe. I know was kind of injured there, but he's back healthy now, and that dude can freaking rake.
Yeah, as long as he's healthy, and he's still nursing a small injury he picked up in spring training. But once he gets back to the field, if he's playing, he's a must-have. And like you mentioned, a few of those other guys on that list are going to benefit. I really think Trey Turner is the top. Obviously, Shohei Ohtani is his own different category. We're not going to talk about him, but the best of the rest, I think, might be Trey Turner. He's going to benefit from that pitch clock. He's going to rack up the stolen bases. He's in a team still. I know he left the Dodgers, so everyone's kind of wary. Like, can the team he's on now, the Phillies, reciprocate that production? I think they'll be just fine. And he's going to get a lot of stolen bases with the new pitch clock. And then another Astro you mentioned is Kyle Tucker. Tucker might be up in the lineup just because of Altuve's injury right now. There's going to be no shift next year. So Kyle Tucker really hits the cover off the ball, and I think he's going to be a top option as well. I'm kind of fading some of the Dodgers guys. I don't know. They didn't do
I didn't put Freddie Freeman.
Yeah, they didn't do too much to excite fans in the offseason. They didn't really get better in any areas. Not that they necessarily needed to. They're still stacked. But I'm going to fade some of the Dodgers guys. But I like the Acuna pick up there as well. Other than Trey Turner, I think he might be one of the best players. He's going to have a real big year if the World Baseball Classic is anything to go off.
Yeah, we talked about, last week's show with Zach about like the outfield, how it's so close as far as who's number one. And to me, Acuna gets a slight edge over Judge and Julio. And for a while, the number one was Mike Trout. And while Mike Trout can still put up elite power numbers, the reason he didn't make this top 12 is because for 5x5, which is what the scoring is, 5x5 rotisserie, where it's runs, home runs, RBIs, stolen bases, batting average, Mike Trout does not steal bases anymore. And he doesn't hit for as good a batting average. He strikes out a ton. He's a slugger. I mean, he's turned into a slugger, which is great. But unless he's hitting like 50, 60 bombs like Aaron Judge, he's not top 12 anymore. I'm sorry, because with Trout's injury history, he hit like 40 bombs last year. If he'd have stayed healthy, he would have been not far behind Judge. But can we really trust him to stay healthy anymore? And then Bobby Witt, I see asking about Bobby Witt there. He's an intriguing young talent. Definitely could be top 12, but the Royals lineup is just, it's lacking where I don't think Witt's going to pile up quite enough numbers to reach that. You got to be elite to be in the top 12. And I didn't even have any pitchers in there. It just goes to show that there's just, the hitters they're getting scarce. There's not as many elite hitters. So if you get one of those early picks, you got to secure one of those guys in that top 12.
For sure. I completely agree. And I think, like you mentioned, teams that don't have as greater lineups, those players are going to be toward the bottom of this top ranking just because they're not going to rack up as many RBIs. And there's so much talent in all of those other lineups that they're not just going to focus on one great player. That's why I think where Mike Trout takes a bit of a hit. Shohei Ohtani is obviously the unicorn that you have to put at number one, but I do agree. I think because the Angels aren't as stacked top to bottom, and because Mike Trout's injury history, I think he should be just off this list, but he should still be near the top, still a top player.
Oh, yeah, for sure. A lot of times you can get Mike Trout at a value in these drafts. Sometimes he slips, and we'll have a rant about that. I got a rant about value because there are a couple of guys that are kind of similar to Trout that people just aren't getting the memo that they shouldn't be going that high anymore. But anyway, let's get into some draft strategies here because I know a lot of times when we're drafting these are some of the biggest dilemmas. And I wanted to talk about pitching because I didn't have any pitchers in the top 12 because it's like the more I play fantasy baseball, the more I realize that you can wait on pitching and still have a good team. I used to think, you got to draft at least one pitcher in the first 3 rounds, sometimes 2, because it's like, starters, there's just so few elite arms. But the issue is arms, they fluctuate. they fluctuate from year to year. One year you could be the Cy Young, and next year your ERA is over 4. You never know with pitching. Pitching is a lot more volatile than hitting, and as a result, I don't tend to touch it until, I'll answer the question here about how early you should draft the starting pitcher. I generally don't draft my first starter until the 4th, sometimes the 5th round, because they're just, I'd rather wait till then and get like a Brandon Woodruff as opposed to having to take his teammate, for example, Corbin Burns in the 2nd. So
yeah, the way that I would answer this question when it comes to maybe first-time fantasy baseball players, it's like drafting a quarterback in a fantasy football draft. You have all those guys who are obviously going to take the Patrick Mahomes, the Josh Allens of the world in the first 3 rounds, 4 rounds,
yeah,
maybe. But I'm one of those guys who, and obviously you are based on what you just said, who's content to sit back and wait for the Joe Burrows of the world and like the Lamar Jacksons, all
Jalen
those type of
Hurts.
guys, the Jalen Hurts. Yeah, well, I was going to say Jalen Hurts, but I have a sneaking suspicion he's going to go a lot higher next year.
Yeah, this year he'll be up with Mahomes and stuff. But yeah, this
Yeah,
year, yeah, Herbert will
yeah,
probably
for
drop
sure.
a little bit.
Yeah,
Trevor
I'm
Lawrence.
perfectly content to sit back and take the Trevor Lawrence, the Joe Burrows, the Jared Goffs of the world, and stack up elsewhere where the true elite is really thin. Because unless you get one of the few elite starting pitchers, the guys who are consistent from year to year, there's not much difference. They pitch once, maybe twice a week, and so then you've got these position players who are playing every day. A 300 hitter who hits 30 home runs is much more valuable than an elite starting pitcher in my eyes. So I'm with you. I'm going to fade him, and I'm going to wait a few rounds.
Yeah, especially in 5x5 and points leagues, the pitchers, they get so many points like for a good start, to where in those I'd probably still take them early, but in 5x5 I'd probably wait, because I agree. If starting pitching seems much deeper than outfield and corners, so it's like
For
that's
sure.
the reason why you can back into the first. I'd much rather like a Vlad Jr., for example, because first base just isn't what it once was. First base, it used to have all the. I think I mentioned this on the show a couple weeks ago. It used to have the Prince Fielder, Ryan Howard, Albert Pujols. Those are truly elite guys, plus some depth. You had some first base depth actually back there. Guys like Billy Butler and stuff were like pretty good depth. Or now it's like if you putting up numbers like that, you're considered an elite first baseman, where you just there's not as much depth there. Where pitching kind of took over last year. The hitting was kind of being more taken over if people were speculating about a juiced ball, but last year it went back the other way. Pitching tended to be more successful than hitting, and as a result, hitters are more scarce, pitchers are more plentiful. So especially in leagues where you have unlimited pickups, it prioritize those hitters, because it's a lot easier to get an arm on the wire than it is a bat. And speaking of more with arms, let's talk closers, relief pitchers, because this is another predicament I find. This is kind of like you said about starters being like quarterbacks. Gabe, I've found closers, I tend to compare that to tight ends. It's like you got a few elite ones, but outside of that, the rest are just a dime a dozen, because it's like they fluctuate. One week this guy's a closer, next week that guy's a closer. To me, I'm focusing more on how elite are these relievers. I'd rather take an elite setup guy as opposed to someone that's a quote unquote closer that just doesn't have that great of stuff. So to me, I'll take one closer within the first 8 rounds. Someone that I know, all right, they're a closer. They're going to get me 30 plus saves. And after I get that one, I don't really care at that point. I'm just trying to build a bullpen, just get good arms. I'm not really worried about saves at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I might not take him in the first 8 rounds just because you've got so many people. It really depends on how big your league is and who you're playing with. I've got a league where I play with some really, really knowledgeable guys. So in those, I might take them in the first 8 rounds. But if you're just playing a casual league with your friends, you might get away with letting them sneak a few more rounds.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, because it's like the reason I like to get one early. Like if someone like Ryan Presley, for example. I don't tend to go with like Class A, the very first one, but I tend to you know, I like to get someone that's reliable, because I mean, if you don't get one like that, then you might be kind of up against it in saves, because it's nice to have those elite setup guys, but if their teams don't wake up and make them the closer at some point, you're gonna probably be hurting in that category.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, the one thing, not necessarily closers. I know the prompt is relief pitchers. The one thing I've done as well, um, look for those diamonds in the rough, at least on ESPN, where you can
Yeah,
find the pitchers who have dual eligibility as starters and relievers. That's a little
right,
cheat that
right.
I found, especially when you have unlimited
Yeah,
pickup, like we
with
mentioned
Johan
earlier.
Duran last year, he was a
Yep,
cheat code. You could put him as a starter. Yeah,
yep,
because your
exactly.
starters don't go every day, so then you could add an extra relief pitcher by putting him as a starting pitcher.
Exactly. So with guys like that, there's some value. You just got to do your research and find them. But those are usually the diamonds in the rough that you can find in the later rounds.
Right on. So let's move on now to talk about position scarcity, because I know this is something that we hear about all the time. Hear about it some in football with, like, with the tight end position, but with baseball we hear it a lot, because you got like catcher really scarce, second base really scarce, hell, even outfield, third base, first. I mean, it's shortstop's really the only hitting position that's still got some depth. All the other ones to me are kind of lacking. So, but to me, though, the ones that get the most play, and the reason I pose this question is because I notice in drafts, people pull up a catcher, for example, JT Realmuto because he steals bases, or Adley Rutschman because he's got so much hype behind him. They'll pull these guys up in like the third or fourth round, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, it's scarce. They're scarce, but was that worth that? You just passed up on, for example, I think, like, like a 30 homer third baseman, first baseman, like Nolan Arenado. You just pass up on Nolan Arenado or Paul Goldschmidt, or someone around that range, Matt Olson, Austin Riley, for freaking a catcher. I know it's an elite catcher, but that catcher is not putting up the kind of numbers. But the argument is, oh, well, I'm getting a positional advantage with this guy. So I'll let you have the floor on this one, Gabe. Should position scarcity play a factor during the draft?
I think it definitely plays a factor. And, you kind of, I'm one of those people who lets the league dictate that kind of stuff. I'm going to sit back and wait. But if they want to go on a run, it's similar. We're going back to the football analogy. This is more like tight ends for me. There's going to be people who take tight ends in the first two rounds. Obviously, Travis Kelce's the exception. But if I've got guys in my fantasy football league taking Mark Andrews in the second round, that's fine. I'll let them. That just means I get to feast on the better players towards the top. So I'm not going to let the position scarcity play into my draft strategy. I'm going to do what I've been doing. There's not much of a difference between the guys at catcher, like you said, the Adley Rutschmans and the JT Realmutos of the world. There's not much difference between those truly elite guys and the great catchers as well. So I'm going to sit back and wait, and I'm going to take best player available where I want to go.
Yeah, I can't argue with that, man. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going. Before I asked you, I was just kind of, that's what I mean. That's me. That's the strategy to me. Just go
For sure.
BPA. I mean, you don't overthink it. Go BPA. We got a question from Ryan here. He said, who is the Packers' backup QB now? Should the Packers get a veteran QB to back up Love? Yeah, because I don't think they have one on the roster right now. I mean, yeah, well, they do, Aaron Rodgers, but I mean, he's not going to be on the roster for long, I wouldn't think. So, yeah, I think once they get the Rodgers trade completed, yes, I do think they sign a veteran backup quarterback. I'm saying maybe like a Blaine Gabbert.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be interesting. I'm not going to definitively say anything until we see that Rodgers trade. They could draft a quarterback to be on that roster as well. They might start carrying three. You never know. It's just and the veteran quarterback market. There's so many options still out there. There
Yeah.
really are. So I don't think the Packers are stressing. Based on everything we've heard, they absolutely love Jordan Love. Aaron Rodgers even spoke highly of him. So, but I want to wait and see the compensation for Aaron Rodgers. I want to see what they get in the draft and how much room they've got to play with elsewhere before talking about a veteran quarterback backup.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, gotta get the Rodgers deal done first. And our last fantasy baseball draft question, for those that are playing fantasy baseball, got drafts this week or this weekend, good luck to y'all. Crush it. Hope y'all keep doing y'all's thing and watching our content. And yeah, we'll bring home these chippers. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So shout out to everyone that's got the heart to get in these fantasy baseball leagues. They're not for the flakes. They're for the degenerate savages. So our last question here: are injured players worth drafting? For example, Bryce Harper, Jose Altuve, guys that they're injured now, but they could come back. And if so, how soon? I mean, to me, it depends on if your league has injured list slots. If you got like 2 or 3 IL spots you can stash them on, then definitely. But to me, if you don't have IL slots, it's kind of tough to stash somebody for 2+ months.
Yeah, I think it really just depends on the player in terms of are they worth drafting, and if so, where. Obviously, Jose Altuve, he's not going to fall too much. He's still a premium second baseman and a premium baseball player, whereas Bryce Harper, I'd hold off on him. He's going to be out a long time.
Yeah.
So, and then, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this as well in terms of the injured players. There's a rumor flying out there that Edwin Diaz might be eyeing a comeback. So if you have those 3 IL spots, and you might want to stash him potentially and grab him up at the end of the year for a late playoff run. It just depends. Depends on the player, depends on the injury. But I would say for the superstars, if you have sufficient IL spots, if they're there a few rounds after where you take them, like in terms of Altuve or Alvarez, I would take them. But in terms of Harper, that's one of those just wait and see. I'm not going to be one of those people who takes him just to take him because he's there in the mid rounds. He's going to miss a significant chunk of the season. So if he's still there in the late rounds, I would definitely take him if you have the IR spot. But
Yeah, IL. Yeah, because another thing that's a catch with Harper, then the reason why if you don't have the IL spots, I wouldn't draft him is because he's not even outfield eligible anymore on ESPN. He was strictly a DH last year, where he'd only be utility eligible. So it's even more of a dent in his value. So, yeah, probably not going to mess with Bryce Harper. Altuve, though, yeah, definitely worth the wait, even if you don't have IL spots, because he's the number 1 second baseman when he's out there. But and we also have some injured arms. Carlos Rodon expected to miss some time early and stuff, and then suspended players. Fernando Tatis really the only one of significance. And the reason I bring him up because I'd like to segue into my rant. We got our Let Me Sound Off rant segment here to close out the fantasy roundup here, presented by. Let me shout out our sponsor here before we sign off, Caesars Sportsbook. Make sure to go check out Caesars. The first bet on us, get up to $12.50 back as a free bet. If you don't win, use the promo code NOLA full. Got a lot of March Madness action here. Sweet 16 starting up this weekend. Make sure to get in on that if you haven't already. We've also got our LSU poster giveaway. 3 poster set. Bet $10. Receive a commemorative set. You make sure to head on over to Caesars. Use that promo code. And, get them LSU posters. And, let's get our rant going here. I know y'all like to hear us rant. So my rant here is stop drafting these guys like Fernando Tatis and Jacob deGrom, for example. Guys that they get hurt year after year, always have issues. Stop drafting these guys early. Yes, the talent is there. They've got elite first-round talent, but the results aren't. We play fantasy baseball to draft players that are going to get us the most statistics. They're going to pile up the best numbers to get us, at the top of the league. And if you have guys like Tatis and deGrom, they'll do that for you, but for only half the season. This is a 6-month season. I want guys that are going to be available for the full 6 months. I know injuries can be fluky. I know you can draft someone that's healthy as a horse and they might have a fluke injury, but it's all about odds. And the odds of these guys having problems is way higher than for someone that's always out there. Like those guys we talked about in a few minutes ago, guys like Trey Turner, he's always available. Jose Ramirez, always out there. I mean, Aaron Judge, and he had some issues, but last year proved that he could be out there all the games. Acuna, other than the 1 year with the knee, always out there. Ohtani played all the games. I mean, these guys, you got to draft guys that play. I know that sounds like common sense, like, well, duh, but it's like Tatis. It's just, I see it in all these drafts. People, oh, Tatis, he's elite. He's got elite upside. But he's already suspended 20 games. And the guy didn't play a single game last year. He's the Zion Williamson of MLB. And we always hope and hope and hope that those guys can stay healthy, but they never seem to be able to. And I'm tired of getting burned by that. So I'm staying far away from Tatis. DeGrom, the same boat. It's been over 3 years now since DeGrom's put up a full allotment of innings. Hadn't even thrown much more than 100 innings a season the last 3 years. So what makes you think he's going to stay healthy now? And he's going to Texas on top of that, which is way more of a hitter's park. That's why pitchers just don't seem to do well in Texas. The Rangers, when's the last time the Rangers have had an ace? What, Cliff Lee? I mean, that's over 10 years ago. So I just stop, y'all. Stop getting burned by these guys. Take more reliable options. So that's how I feel about it. I'm just tired of getting burned by these guys.
It's understandable.
So now that I got that out of my system, Gabe's got a little rant for us about the WBC USA Japan, the finale set for tonight. Have the floor, sir.
So I got some figures for you, Spencer. We love stats here. 93.6% of TVs in Japan last night were tuned into the semifinal between Japan and Mexico. Since playing for Team Japan, Lars Nootbaar's Instagram has gone up from 59,000 followers to 664,000 followers.
Cool.
In less than 3 weeks. There are projections out there that tonight's game between the U.S. and Japan, the World Baseball Classic final, is going to break television viewing records. Now, why do I bring all of these up? Because people care about the World Baseball Classic. It might be young. It's just getting off the ground. There's only been a few tournaments played. It hasn't been played in 6 years because of COVID, and people don't necessarily understand it. But let me tell you, this tournament is going to be something, and it's here to stay. Stop saying it's stupid because people are getting injured. I'm an Astros fan. Jose Altuve got injured at the World Baseball Classic, and you know what? I don't care. It could happen in spring training as well. We've seen so many injuries, Brandon Nimmo, Carlos Rodon. Those happened in spring training. That wasn't at the World Baseball Classic. This thing is not stupid. And I mean, you talk to the players, and some of them, Adam Wainwright, notably for the U.S., has said it's such an honor to wear the U.S. shirt. Mike Trout saw what they did in 2017 and said, I need to be a part of this. And so this is really the first tournament where we've seen star players come out and do this. It's the World Cup of baseball. I know that's a lazy comparison, but it is. It's just in its infant stages. But one day I truly believe that it could be something very big, and it's meaningful for all of these players. So I'm just tired of people saying that it's some stupid tournament and it doesn't matter, and people are just getting injured. So what's it good for? It's legit. People love it all across the globe. Just because you don't, that doesn't mean it's stupid. People love it. The players love it. Get behind it. It's awesome to have the world compete in sports. And you know what? I'm really excited to see the U.S. go out there and hopefully win their second WBC in a row. So turn it on tonight, FS1. It's going to be exciting. Enjoy it. Get into it.
Yeah, so many haters out there. Yeah, I hear you, man.
I'm tired of people who are saying it's not fun or it's not important and it's stupid. No, it's awesome. Have some pride. Love baseball. These guys are having so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's one of those things. Baseball, it's like the classic sport to poo-poo on right now. Everyone's like, oh, baseball sucks. It's boring. It puts me to sleep. But it's like they don't even give it a chance, So it's like, before you poo-poo on it, to me, you got to watch it. And I admit, I'm not as into baseball as I used to be. I'm more on the football year-round side. I've kind of gotten more on that. But I still respect and love baseball because it's the most unique sport out there. It's not it's not end zone to end zone or goal to goal. It's completely its own thing, and it's never gonna be another sport like it. So to me, it's gonna always have that nostalgia. So, and the WBC is these guys. You can tell they're very passionate about it. The whole world's into it. And I mean, I hear people poo poo on the World Cup. I mean, I respect it, even though I'm not that into soccer. That's just the way it goes. People are they just got a lot of haters out there. So yeah, so don't worry about it. You know, y'all that enjoy the baseball and WBC, I'll go enjoy that. For those that are football year round, give it a chance. And if you don't like it, well, cool. But all this hate, you know, I mean, I get it, free speech, so can't stop people from hating. But that's just, if you want to hate, fine. But I'm tuning you out. Just saying.
All I'm saying is turn it on tonight. Turn on the
Yeah,
USA
give it a
versus
chance.
Japan.
Give it a chance.
Watch the
yeah.
quality baseball that's going to be played, and then look me in the eye and tell me you're not having fun watching it. It's going to be awesome. I'm really excited for it.
For sure, man. But yeah, we'll see how that goes down. U.S. favored over Japan. Japan could offer value though, because that Japanese team is really something there. You talk about caring. I mean, I know you can't say that about Japan. Japan does not poo poo on it. Japan, they are all in. So if I'm the U.S., I'd be a little worried. You know, the players are gonna be all in, but like, man, the U.S. fans need to be out in full force because yeah, the Japanese they're gonna give it their all.
They are, and it's awesome. I absolutely love it, and I wish other people would do that as well.
Yeah, which they have a good amount that do, you know. So it's just the way it is. I mean, they got people. I mean, some people even poo poo on football. Some people you just can't please. But anyway, that's gonna wrap it up here for the fantasy roundup. Really appreciate everyone that tuned in. Appreciate all the questions, comments. Good luck in y'all's fantasy baseball drafts. We'll still have some baseball talk, but you know, now that the draft season's up, probably shift a little more to football because I mean that's what the people want, you know, year-round football. So we'll still have some baseball though, and maybe some basketball next week. I know a lot of y'all in the fantasy basketball playoffs. So yeah, any last words, Gabe?
Watch the World Baseball Classic final tonight. Go US.
Oh, show. All right, y'all. I think that's gonna do it here. Spencer the Guru, Gabe Henderson signing off. You've been listening and watching the fantasy roundup here on bet.NOLA.com. Y'all have a good one.